When people talk about elite military squads, the first names that roll off the tongue are SEAL Team 6, the SAS, or the SBS. Those are the poster boys, the ones everyone knows. But lurking quietly behind the curtain is a unit that almost never gets mentioned, and when it does, it's usually wrapped in controversy, rumors, or speculation. We're talking about the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, the SRR, Britain's secretive shadow force. But what makes them so mysterious, and how dangerous are they really? The truth is, the SRR is a unit designed not to be seen. They don't want parades, they don't want headlines, and they certainly don't want Hollywood. Their entire reputation thrives on the fact that you barely know anything about them, which in itself is telling. If a regiment's name only surfaces in whispers, it usually means one of two things. Either they're not doing much at all, or they're doing so much that it has to stay hidden. And with the SRR, it's very clearly the latter. To understand why this unit exists, you have to rewind the clock to Northern Ireland in the 1970s. Back then, the British Army realized it needed eyes on the ground that didn't look like soldiers. Enter the 14th Intelligence Company, better known as the Date. They were the ones sitting in unmarked cars for days, bugging safe houses, following IRA members through the streets of Belfast, blending in so well that they could stand next to their targets in a pub and not raise an eyebrow. They weren't built to fight, they were built to watch, to wait, to know. And out of that surveillance culture, the SRR was eventually born in 2005. So why bother creating a brand new regiment if the SAS and SBS already had decades of elite credibility? Because sometimes brute force doesn't get you answers. You don't always need someone kicking down doors. Sometimes you need someone who can vanish into the wallpaper, someone who can track a high-value target across multiple borders, someone who can set the stage so the SAS and SBS know exactly when to strike. That's the SRR's role. Not the sword, not the shield, but the silent hand that guides both. Now, here's where things get messy. The SRR's official size has never been confirmed, but reports suggest it's about 150 operators. That sounds small, but you don't need numbers when your job is invisibility. Their training attrition is brutal, with more than 90% washing out. And unlike the traditional units that pride themselves on pure physical grit, the SRR filters for people who can handle the psychological grind of undercover work. Can you sit in a tiny room watching the same door for days without losing focus? Can you lie convincingly enough to pass as someone else for months? Can you carry the weight of knowing you're deep behind enemy lines with no cavalry coming if you're caught? That's the kind of operator the SRR looks for. And here's something most people don't realize. The SRR was one of the first elite British units to openly recruit women into combat roles. Not as medics, not as support, but as frontline operators. Why? Because in surveillance, diversity is strength. A middle-aged woman walking down the street with shopping bags is far less suspicious than a muscled guy in military boots. And that's the genius of the SRR. They turn ordinary appearances into extraordinary cover. But as with anything cloaked in secrecy, the SRR has had its fair share of controversy. And when they do slip into the news, it's rarely good. The biggest flashpoint came in July 2005, right after the London bombings. SRR operatives were part of the surveillance on a man named Jean-Charles de Menezes, a Brazilian electrician who was tragically mistaken for a terrorist suspect. Tracked through the city, he ended up being shot dead by police in a case that still haunts Britain's security services. The SRR's fingerprints were on that operation, and while the official inquiries tried to untangle the chain of decisions, the damage to public trust was already done. It was proof of just how fine the line is between effective surveillance and catastrophic error. Then there was Basra, September 2005. Two SRR operators caught in the middle of Iraq, dressed like locals, running a mission that the Iraqi police didn't appreciate. A firefight broke out, the operatives were arrested, and suddenly Britain had a diplomatic nightmare on its hands. The solution? The SAS literally smashed them out of jail, in a rescue that looked more like an action movie than real life. And while that kind of operation builds legend inside the military world, outside it raised uncomfortable questions. What were SRR operatives really doing there? How deep into Iraq's local politics had they waded? And just how far was Britain willing to go to protect its shadows? And these are just the operations we know about. In Iraq, the SRR reportedly worked hand in hand with Task Force Black, the joint unit tasked with hunting down al-Qaeda leaders. In Afghanistan, their role was to track Taliban commanders, feeding real-time intelligence to SBS assault teams. There are whispers of operations in Syria, rumors of surveillance in Eastern Europe, even speculation about covert missions linked to countering Russian influence. And that's the thing, when it comes to the SRR, half the battle is separating fact from myth. For every confirmed mission, there are 10 stories nobody can quite verify, which, let's be honest, is exactly how they want it. But here's the flip side. Secrecy has a price. The SRR has been accused, though never officially confirmed, of being tied to covert rendition programs, questionable interrogations, and intelligence gathering that pushes right up against the line of legality. Of course, the British government denies all of it, but the whispers won't go away. And that raises the bigger question. How long can a unit operate in total darkness before accountability eventually catches up? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that every shadow war eventually finds its way into the light. And yet, for all the controversies, the SRR's value to Britain's security is undeniable. Think about modern warfare. It's no longer about two armies lining up on a battlefield. It's about networks, insurgencies, cyber cells, and terrorist plots hatched in apartment basements. To counter that, you need people who can slip into those worlds, who can observe without being observed, and who can feed intelligence to strike teams with pinpoint accuracy. Without the SRR, the SAS and SBS would be flying blind. So, what does the future hold for the SRR? In an era where technology tracks almost everything, phones, cameras, biometrics, blending into the background is harder than ever. Invisibility is no longer just about disguise. It's about staying one step ahead of algorithms and satellites. And yet, if there's a unit designed to adapt to that environment, it's the SRR. They were born from surveillance and reinvention. The date morphed into the SRR, and the SRR will continue to morph into whatever the modern battlefield demands. Still, one can't help but wonder, could the very secrecy that makes them effective also be their undoing? If the SRR ever finds itself exposed, its methods laid bare, how would Britain explain it? Would the government admit what these operators have really been doing, or double down on the shadows? That's the speculative tension surrounding this regiment. They exist in a gray zone, both indispensable and controversial, vital yet untouchable. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. The SAS and SBS can afford to be legends because they thrive in the open. Their victories are known, their failures explained away. But the SRR question, they live in permanent limbo. When they succeed, nobody knows. When they fail, the headlines explode. It's an existence built on contradictions, secret but essential, hidden but central, unrecognized yet utterly relied upon. So, the next time someone brings up SEAL Team 6 or the SAS as the ultimate icons of special forces, remember there's another name in the shadows, the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, the Invisible Guardians. The unit that doesn't need glory, doesn't crave recognition, and doesn't want to be known. But without them, Britain's sharpest military edge would be swinging blind. The real question is simple. How long can they keep hiding in plain sight? If you think you got the answer, let us know in the comments down below.